All right, well, welcome back to eXplain, where we engage the culture from a biblical perspective in a manner which glorifies God. So today we're going to be talking about this whole skirmish that erupted recently involving Harvard and Harvard's president Claudine Gay, who resigned regarding a plagiarism scandal. Of course, this week, it seems as if, unfortunately, this is a case where this Ivy League college, non-Christian Ivy League college, Harvard, has unfortunately beat Christians to the punch as far as resigning over plagiarism allegations. And so we'll get to that. We'll get to what I mean by that, and of course, we'll engage with a post that appeared on X this week. We'll get to all that, but a little bit of background. Of course, if you've been following the news, you are aware that a plagiarism scandal erupted involving Harvard president Claudine Gay, who has since resigned. And of course, the funny thing now is, they're trying to make Claudine Gay some sort of victim. They've said all sorts of things, like, for example, that she was the target of racism or of some kind of marginalization during her time as president or before her time as president or something like that. And of course, I'm not going to say for sure that she wasn't. But it's very interesting how oftentimes when things like this happen to people that the political left seem to champion, a lot of times when things like this happen, like a plagiarism scandal, for example, they come up with all these other reasons why this person was justified in doing it, or why this person really was in the right, or why this person really was a victim. All sorts of stuff like that has come out. And so with this episode, know one thing. I am not in any way condoning the actions, behavior, beliefs, worldview, or anything of Claudine Gay or of Harvard. Quite the contrary. Harvard was once a school that was known for its academic prowess, its focus on unbiased learning, unbiased education, right? And now we know, of course, they've fallen far from that. And many other really smart people have done a lot of researches. A lot of researchers have done a lot of work on how Ivy League schools have started to decline, right? All sorts of things like that have come out regarding Harvard. So just know that in this episode, I am in no way condoning the behavior of Harvard or of Claudine Gay. I am merely saying, look, we know how wicked and how vile and how unpleasing to God Harvard has been, and how, all those same things, how wicked, how vile, how unpleasing to God Claudine Gay has been. With us knowing that, isn't it a shock that this wicked, vile, unpleasing to God group of people and person, Claudine Gay, has beat a Christian to the punch as far as resigning over plagiarism allegations. And of course, what am I talking about, right? What am I talking about? Well, I gave you the background on the Harvard end. You may or may not be familiar with that part of it. The part of it that you might not be familiar with is the plagiarism scandal that happened in the SBC. This is not a recent thing. The Harvard issue has caused this past SBC plagiarism scandal to boil back to the top. So it involves a man named Ed Litton. Ed Litton, a while back, Ed Litton just wholesale plagiarized a bunch of sermons from this guy named J.D. Greear. down to the point where, and I may not be quoting this word for word or saying the analogy, exactly how it was presented in the sermon. But essentially, J.D. Greear had and this is just one of other examples, right? So this is just one primary example of the type of stuff that Litton would do. J.D. Greear, he gave a sermon illustration such as, this is just a for example, but this is the type of stuff that was happening. He would say something like, "So I took my wife and my kids out for ice cream," right? That he would use that, that would be the start of a sermon illustration, right? And so when Ed Litton stole J.D. Greer's sermon, or this was one of those that he stole. When Ed Litton gave the illustration, he didn't even try to make it his own. He just said it exactly the same way that J.D. Greear would have said it. He said, "So I took my wife and my kids out to ice cream," right? So it's that type of thing. So not only did he borrow the content, the research and the hard work, the grunt work from Greear wholesale, but he also even just took the illustrations and made them his own, even though it wouldn't have been truthful. For example, if I told you, if I was preaching a sermon right now, right, and I said, I drove in my car down the highway and a deer or moose ran out in front of me, right? And let's say someone else decided to steal that part of my sermon, and they gave the illustration the same way. They said, "So I drove down the highway and a moose ran out in front of me." But the reality is what? Maybe that person has never had a moose run out in front of them in their entire life. So not only are they stealing from someone else, right? They're being dishonest. So this is the type of stuff that Ed Litton was up to, okay? So that's the background, okay? So our post on X today comes from a guy named Ben Zeisloft. Ben Zeisloft is a solid guy. I know last week we reacted to a post from Dr. Kevin M. Young, who, I couldn't really endorse any of his content. I would not endorse any of his content because he is not someone who speaks the truth. He spreads around lots and lots of lies. Ben Zeisloft, on the other hand, Ben Zeisloft is a solid guy. I can stand behind and support the things that he says. Anytime you see a post from Ben Zeisloft, I'd say you got a pretty good chance of that being right and being a good post. Ben Zeisloft is an excellent writer, excellent reporter. He's broken a bunch of really big news stories over the course of the past calendar year. Really important work that Ben is doing. And he frequents X. So this is what he posted. It seems like he's probably about to drop another one of those famous stories, right? News stories. But at any rate, this is the post for this week from Ben Zeisloft. Here goes. Reached out to SEBTS President Danny Akin, as well as most of the trustees at SEBTS, about whether they believe Ed Litton should resign as a trustee over his sermon plagiarism. I also contacted most SEBTS faculty members to ask whether they think Ed Litton should remain a trustee. Several have responded, and I expect to report on their sentiments next week. Okay, so just here at the outset, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I'm sure Ben's going to have it covered when he when he reports on this, like he said. By the time that this video is getting to you, the potential is there that he could have already reported on this. So if you see anything regarding this with Ben Zeisloft's name on it, again, probably some solid stuff, and you should probably check it out. Okay, so basically this just gives us a little bit more background, this part of the post from Zeisloft. Basically, Litton is a trustee at this school, SEBTS, and again, like I said, the Harvard issue has reignited this debate over whether or not Ed Litton should be involved in in any kind of ministry, or whether or not he should resign. So let's continue. some stuff I want to say about what Ben says next. The matter of Ed Litton repeatedly borrowing sermon content and structure from J.D. Greear word for word and without attribution, a controversy which drew national attention to both inside and outside the evangelical world, reemerged once Harvard president Claudine Gay resigned amid plagiarism across her academic work. Both schools have strict penalties for students caught plagiarizing. Okay, so again, I think this just covers a lot of the background that we've already covered regarding Claudine Gay. But I think one important thing that Ben adds for us is the fact that both schools have very strict rules regarding plagiarism. Okay, both schools have very strict rules regarding plagiarism. And so if they're going to hold their students to such a high standard, right? If SEBTS is going to hold its students to such a high standard, why wouldn't they hold Ed Litton to the same standard? Okay, let's keep going. Many have noted that Ed Litton remains a trustee at SEBTS, a distinctly Christian school, even as Harvard, a secular school, saw their president resign over plagiarism. I have reached out to SEBTS multiple times without any response. And then he says you can read our reporting on the matter here, and there's a link there. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take that link and I'm going to post it in the description down below of this video, so you can check that out. Again, because Ben Zeisloft and all the guys that work with him are solid guys, and I would trust them. I would trust what they have to say. All right, let's finish this up here. As David Schrock noted in an interview for the Repub Sentinel article, it is embarrassing that Harvard, through many fits and starts, slouched towards righteousness regarding a president that plagiarized, while the Southern Baptist Convention, when given the same opportunity, could not even bring a resolution to the floor. Wow. Wow. And then it concludes, I look forward to a response from SEBTS on this very important matter. Okay. So a couple of things there that I wanted to know. When Ben says, what does Ben mean when he says that Harvard slouched towards righteousness? Because I know, Ben's other behavior online. What he's not saying is that Harvard is righteous, right? He's not saying that. What he is saying is that Harvard, even though they are not a Christian school, even though they didn't even really want to do this, right? Even though they didn't really want to do this regarding Claudine Gay, still it happened. Still, Claudine Gay did resign. She did resign, right? And it's incredible how he says what David Schrock said here, and it's good what David Schrock had to say. The Southern Baptist Convention couldn't even bring a resolution to the floor. Okay. So why do I bring this up? Why do I bring up this issue? Well, because for so many in the SBC and in the wider evangelical world, one of the main things that Christians have used, one of the main reasons that Christians have used over the past couple of years is the world is watching, right? They've used this phrase, the world is watching. And I think that was probably used during the Black Lives Matter stuff that was going on. I think it was probably used even during 2020 and all the stuff that went on regarding the pandemic and all that stuff. And churches' response to COVID. I'm sure that was also used in the SBC regarding their issues with critical race theory, and maybe even I think it was also even used when the SBC had those issues with Rachel Denhollander and abuse allegations towards certain pastors and stuff like that. Anyway, the the overarching point that I'm trying to make here is the SBC and the wider church have used this tagline, "The world is watching," as a reason for why we should act and think a certain way. Basically, what are they saying? They're telling Christians to remember their witness, to the world. And I wanted to talk about witness because it's interesting. Of course, it is very important for Christians to have a strong witness to the world, right? That is very important. I'm not downgrading that. But as Dusty Devers said, the question, I'll put it up on the side of the screen because this was a tweet that see, I keep saying tweet. It was a post on X that he put out. Dusty Devers said that the question we should be asking, or the thing we should be reminding ourselves of, is the fact that God is watching. God is watching, right? And that is the more important thing. The more important thing than the world is watching is the fact that God is watching to see how we will react, right? How we will behave. And the reality is, we will all stand before the judgment seat, right? We will all stand before that's what Romans says. Romans tells us that we will all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. We'll give an account for the things that we did. We'll give an account for the things that we did. And so rather than allowing the world to continuously put us on trial and say, what do we think of the Christians here? And what do we think of the Christians there? And what do we think of their response there? We can't control the fact that they're going to criticize us. But rather than letting what they're saying just live rent-free in our heads, I think the thing that we should be more concerned about is the fact that we're going to stand before God and give an answer for the things that we did. So Dusty Devers is 100% right. The more important thing to be asking is, what does God think about this? What does God think about this? And Dusty is 100% right. So in order, the questions that we have, and we can't get this order wrong. We can't get this order messed up. In order, the questions that we have to be asking are the things that we have to be reminding ourselves of. These are the two things. God is watching, okay? That is the most important thing, and it supersedes the next thing. God is watching, and the world is watching. But it has to be in that order. If what we do because God is watching makes the world upset, we still have to do what we do because God is watching. Right? We can't change what we do because God is watching, because the world is also watching and they're going to get upset. That's not the way it works. We can't do it that way. Okay? So that is important. But now as we bring it back around to this Ed Litton issue, the interesting thing here is Ed Litton's case fails both of these tests. It fails both of these tests, okay? So if God is watching and God cares about the way that we act, he cares that we act in an honest and upstanding manner, that we don't steal work from other people, right? Like Ed Litton did with J.D. Greer. He cares about that stuff. And he wants to see repentance, right? He wants to see people repent, right? And so as far as Ed Litton's case, we can apply this to that. God is watching. Is God pleased with what Ed Litton is doing? Is God pleased with the fact that the SBC is allowing Ed Litton or allowed Ed Litton to do this and behave this way without confronting him, without dealing with him? Is God pleased that SEBTS is allowing Ed Litton to remain on board as a trustee and not be held accountable for his actions? No, I think we can pretty safely say that God, who does not like lying, and God, who does not like stealing, would not be pleased with the fact that there are Christians around Ed Litton, professing Christians around Ed Litton, who are not dealing with him regarding his sin. Okay? So, number one, God is watching. God is watching. But if we apply that to this situation, we can see that the SBC didn't do anything, right? They didn't do anything, even though God was watching. SEBTS is not doing anything regarding Ed Litton, right? Not that we know of, even though God is watching, okay? And number two, and this is really the interesting thing, is the world is watching. The world is watching. Now, again, like I said, there were people in 2020 specifically that got the order wrong, right? They got the order wrong. They didn't take into account the fact that God was watching, and they just thought about how the world was watching. And because they just thought about how the world was watching, it caused them to act a certain way. It caused them to act in a way that pacified the world. For example, close down your churches for like a really extended amount of time, right? Or, go march out in the BLM parades or whatever, things like that. Because they said the world was watching, it caused them to do that because they prioritized what the world thought about instead of what God thought, right? And, it's interesting because you think about the book of Ezekiel. What is Ezekiel told? Ezekiel is told not to fear men. Don't fear men. Instead, we should be fearing God. But even, here's the thing. This is the thing that gets me. Even if we were to apply the woke Christians, and I use that term very intentionally, if we were to apply the woke Christians guidelines to the Ed Litton situation. So what I'm saying is we should be focused on what God thinks first, right? But even if the woke Christians don't think that and they want to stick to their guideline of the world is watching, right? Even if they want to think of it that way, well, the Ed Litton situation still fails even their test, and nobody's talking about it, right? And I forget who brought. I think it was Tom Askell. Yeah, it was Tom Askell, who was just a solid, great pastor in the SBC. There are still good men in the SBC, and Tom Askell is one of them, and he is fighting to get the SBC on track, right? And man, he is doing a good job. He is doing his very best. But anyway, I think it was Tom Askell who said, where in this Ed Litton situation have we heard the phrase, the world is watching, right? Because if we actually believed that the world was watching, even if the woke Christians or the left, the Christians who would be considered maybe politically a little bit more liberal, even if they believed that the world was watching, well, they're clearly showing that they don't in this situation, right? Or they're clearly showing that they don't care because guess what? The world is watching to see how SEBTS is going to treat Ed Litton in the wake of Claudine Gay's resignation over the same exact issue. So it's just shameful that this school, this secular, wicked school would beat SEBTS to having someone resign over plagiarism, right? This is a Christian school, and we've heard this talking point so many times that that Christians should be the leader in should be leading in character and should be leading in virtue and should be leading in personal piety and should be leading in leading the world in these things, right? And that's correct. That's correct, right? As long as those words are defined correctly, that's correct. But here we see that that's just not happening. That's not happening. Christians are lagging behind the world, and that is shameful. That is shameful that the world figures out, oh man, we got to get this president to resign over plagiarism, but Christians, professing Christians, can't figure that out. Professing Christians can't figure out that they need to have this person get off the trustee board because of plagiarism. The SBC couldn't get a motion to the floor to deal with this issue. Nobody did anything, right? Or even if people did do things, right? Now, of course, Ben's doing things, right? Ben Zeisloft is doing things. David Schrock, of course, he's doing things. Tom Askell has done things, so there are people that are doing things, but the majority of people are just suppressing the issue. And it's almost like people think that they can just stick their heads in the sand and say, problem, go away. And then eventually they'll pull their heads up out of the sand and the problem will be gone. Well, that's just not the way that it works. Okay. So SEBTS, I'm going to use the line that I don't know if specifically people in your college have used it, but people that are affiliated with your college and people that your college likes have used this line, and I'm going to use it on you. The world is watching. The world is watching. What are you going to do about Ed Litton? When an evil, woke, wicked school gets their president to resign over plagiarism, and you won't do anything as a professing Christian school to deal with the sin in your camp. It's shameful. It's shameful. Okay. Sorry, I got a little bit fired up there. But that's the reality. That's what we're dealing with here, okay? As Christians, we need to be focused, like Dusty Deavers said, we need to be focused primarily on what God thinks, right? And even when you apply that to this situation, we know that God would want Ed Litton to repent. God would want that, right? And God would want people to deal with him regarding his sin. We know that, right? We know that. We know that God would want that. But even if we apply the misguided talking point, right, where they care about the world over and above what God thinks, right, which is wrong. But even if we apply their standard, the world is watching, and nothing has been done. Nothing has been done. So the question I have is, do people who claim to be evangelicals, who want to push things on the church like LGBTQ stuff and, the BLM stuff and, an abortion and, the COVID lockdowns and stuff, the extended COVID lockdowns back in 2020, and even beyond for some churches, do those people really care that the world is watching? Or did they just use that phrase as a cloak to advance their agenda, to advance what they wanted to advance? Because if they really believed that the world was watching, wouldn't they be doing something now about this plagiarism scandal and Ed Litton? I think they would. If they really believed that the world was watching, I think they'd be doing something about Ed Litton. But I don't think that they believe that the world is watching. And even if they do believe I don't think that they care. And I also think that they either don't believe that God is watching or they don't care enough that God is watching. So, okay. Well, that wraps up our show for today regarding Ed Litton, Harvard, plagiarism, all that stuff. I'm really thankful, once again, to Ben Zeisloft. He did an excellent job with that post. He does excellent work. If you have an account on X, go follow him. But these are the things that we need to know to engage the culture in a manner that glorifies God. First, we need to think about, what does God think about this? And only after we've answered that question do we think about what the world thinks about what we're doing. All right? So I hope you guys have a great week, and we will see you next time.